Hi there, I'm Annie from MumLife Australia and you're listening to the MumLife Australia Podcast, where we combine evidence-based information with practical tips to empower, inspire and support mums. In today's episode, we're talking all about genetically determined and predictable mental leaps in babies, infants and toddlers, and the fussy signs that signal those leaps in development. Our expert guest is Dr Frans Plooij, co-author of the worldwide best-selling infant development book, The Wonder Weeks. We talk specifically about the timing, frequency and duration of mental leaps and fussy phases, the distinction between genetically determined mental leaps and other developmental milestones, growth spurts in babies and infants, the mastering of skills based on personality and preference, and the significance of stormy clouds and sunny periods. Plus, I find out what parents can expect beyond the 10 leaps documented in the Wonder Weeks. Hello, Dr. Frans. It is an absolute pleasure to have you chatting with me on the MumLife Australia podcast. Thank you for chatting with me today.
Thank you for inviting me and you're welcome.
Dr. Frans, I have two very young children, so I've been following the book The Wonder Weeks for quite some time now. But I'd love for you to tell our listeners perhaps what is the book The Wonder Weeks all about?
The book The Wonder Weeks tells about the 10 age-linked difficult periods that all babies go through in the first 20 months of life. These difficult periods are characterized by the 3 C's: crying, clinging and cranky. Babies cry more than they used to do. They are clinging to you more or demand your attention more at a later age, and they are more cranky than usual. They may sleep less and eat less. And naturally, parents are worried and start doubting their parenting skills. But the book tells them there is no need for that. All babies go through difficult periods at these predictable ages, and it is a normal part of development. In addition, the book explains why babies become difficult. It has to do with major brain changes that change the way babies perceive the world. Each time they enter a whole new perceptual world, so to speak. And the book explains what each new perceptual world is all about and how you can help your baby conquer those worlds. That's the reason why we talk about the Wonder Weeks. The difficult periods are not nice, but in fact they are a sign of new progress about to come.
So, Dr. Frans, what's the background behind the Wonder Weeks? How did you discover these 10 leaps that the book talks about that occur in the first 20 months of a child's life?
Well, my late wife, Hetty van der Leijt, the first author of the book, and I made the discovery of the difficult periods in free-living chimpanzees in the Gombe National Park, Tanzania, East Africa. And in fact, when we had discovered it, we found out that these difficult periods have also been reported at the time, for 12 monkey species and 2 non-primate mammals, and even in birds. So the phenomenon of difficult periods at predictable ages is very old indeed, evolutionarily speaking. It goes back at least 70 million years in evolution. Back in the Netherlands, we wanted to know whether the phenomenon is also present in our present-day babies, and we observed our present-day babies in the Netherlands weekly in their homes and found that the phenomenon of difficult periods has survived in our own species. As I said, 10 times in the first 20 months, our babies go through a difficult period and make a leap in their mental development.
That's fascinating. So your study didn't actually begin with human babies, but it began with chimpanzees.
Yes, it's an out of Africa story.
So how long did the research that the book was based on actually take?
Well, the research in Africa, we were there in Africa for 2 years observing chimpanzee babies. And then it took, of course, a few years to write it up and write 2 PhDs. Then we started observing babies in the Netherlands and so forth and so on.
Have any other studies taken place since you made the original discovery? Has the research been verified since then?
Oh, yes. First of all, there are the studies that found the phenomenon in all these other species, from birds to mammals to monkeys to apes. And that alone, and that has continued since we made the discovery, and those animal behavior people added research to it. And that alone is already an indication that this phenomenon of difficult periods at predictable ages should be a universal characteristic in our species and be shown by all babies all over the world, and that it should be independent of cultural differences. But of course, one has to do one's homework, and after we verified the phenomenon in our species, 3 independent research groups from Sweden, England, and Spain have replicated our studies and found difficult periods at the same ages.
You know, even after working through these predictable leaps twice now, I'm still amazed that it's possible to pinpoint these mental leaps to such specific periods in time.
Well, some people have difficulty because they say there are such enormous individual differences in babies' development. But what they forget is that the process we are talking about is the kind of deep down process. And that is timed genetically. The developmental psychology studies that reported about milestones like starting to walk, starting to do this, starting to do that, have shown indeed over a century huge individual differences, but they are the outcome of these deep down processes that we are talking about.
Right.
They are the elaboration, and depending on circumstances, some babies get opportunities much earlier than others, or have a preference, and you get, there might be months or even a year between a certain milestone in one baby and the other, but they are outcome phenomena. They are not the deep down original processes.
I'm so glad that you mentioned preferences. I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that distinction that you just made between the leaps and the milestones. So at the end of each chapter in the book, there's a list of skills and talents that your child might exhibit after they go through the leaps. And you've just reminded me that with my eldest child, who's now been through all 10 of the leaps, when she was younger, I would notice that after each of the leaps, it was always the physical skills and talents that she was perfecting. The skills that related to language or speech, for example, she wasn't so much interested in them, and they would be the ones that would come much later. So just because babies go through the mental leaps at the same predictable times, it doesn't actually mean that they'll perfect the skills that they're capable of after those leaps at the same time.
Exactly. And that's also a perfect way to find out about the personality of the baby early on, because apart from having getting opportunities, babies themselves have preferences, and because they have certain talents in a certain direction, and they might choose to develop a certain skill before other skills because they prefer them. And if you in a certain leap, after the baby has been very difficult, it starts to explore the new perceptual world, and at first it starts to explore together with its parents. You have to be there. You can't go away, and that's a perfect time to see the preferences. And sometimes the preferences come back leap after leap, and then knowing about the preferences and the personality of your baby enables you to empower your baby, to give it all the opportunities that it likes.
So let's just go back a step. So mums who are familiar with the book, they'll know that the first thing you need to do is you actually need to work out what the starting point is for your child for these leaps. So at what date are these predictable leaps going to occur for your child? Now, there seems to be a lot of confusion about the date that mums should be using, whether it's the child's due date or whether it's the date of their birth. Now, the book does make it very clear that it is the child's due date that's relevant and not the date that they're born. So can you elaborate on why it is the due date that's so important and not the date of birth?
Yes, the clock of age of a baby starts ticking at the moment of conception, not birth. The date of birth is irrelevant as far as this clock is concerned, and can be easily weeks early or late, depending on circumstances. And the genetically determined age-linked developmental changes, such as the leaps in mental development, are timed in terms of the time elapsed since conception. And the due date is also calculated in time since conception. If you use that, then you get the best estimate.
So the skills that involve touch and physical abilities, they were the ones that she would perfect quite soon after a leap, and anything else would come much later in time. So just because babies go through the mental leaps at the same predictable times, it doesn't actually mean that they'll perfect the skills that they're capable of after those leaps at the same time.
Of when the next leap is about to occur.
That's really interesting. So actually being outside of the womb makes no difference in terms of the timing of these leaps. So a child who's born prematurely, or perhaps a child who's born after 40 weeks, it's not really relevant. What's relevant is the time that's lapsed since the child was conceived.
Well, exactly, yes, because with every leap in mental development, with every major brain change, the baby gets new capabilities or a new capability. And if it's born early and this capability is not yet in place, the baby can't perceive those new things and can't do anything with them. So it has to wait till the brain is ready.
Okay, that makes sense. So this is probably a good segue to a question we got from one of the mums in the MumLife Australia community, and she wanted to know whether age was the only relevant factor when a child might experience these leaps. So she asked whether maybe the weight of a child might make a difference, or even the circumference of their head. So whether those two factors might make a difference to when these leaps might occur, or is it just as simple as the age?
No, weight plays no role. Let me give this a bit of nuance. It doesn't make a difference as far as the leap of mental development, as far as the start of the difficult period is concerned, or the start of the brain change. It all goes together. But what I said, with the new capability, they start developing new skills, and they vary a lot in age, as I just said. So let's take a baby that has a very heavy skeleton. Or it has less muscle power than another baby, then the brain would be ready, for instance, to lift the head. But if it's so heavy, it takes more time before the muscles are able to lift the head. So then, depending on circumstances or the weight of the skeleton, the development, the mastering of a certain skill may be later as compared to other babies. But that skill is, again, an elaboration of the new capability, the new brain capability, and the timing of the brain changes of the developmental leaps is not dependent on weight. Only the elaboration or the mastering of skills.
So during that period of time, which we refer to as the leap, that is when we would expect a child to exhibit the 3 C's: the crying, the clinging, and the crankiness. Is that right?
Yes, because baby is difficult. You may ask, why is the baby difficult? Well, that's because of the brain change. Because the brain change changes the perception the baby has of the world around it, and also its own body inside. It can perceive new things that it couldn't perceive before, and that's bewildering to the baby. You can imagine that for yourself, if you all of a sudden one morning wake up on a new planet with 3 moons and 5 suns and God knows what, you would be terrified, and all you would like to do is cling to your partner and be terrified, and from there try and explore this new world, and if you can survive. Well, that's what the baby does. It clings to its mother or father. It's terrified. It's anxious, and then slowly from a safe base, it starts to explore this and try out this new world, and tries to create order into chaos. So that's why the baby is difficult, and I've compared it with a lighthouse. The difficult periods, the 3 C's, the difficult behavior is like a lighthouse, signaling, okay, this brain change has happened, and also signaling, okay, new progress is to come now. New skills will be mastered.
Having worked through the book myself, I've noticed that in some circumstances, the leaps have in fact coincided with growth spurts for my children. So is that just a coincidence then that in some cases a leap and a growth spurt might actually occur at the same time?
Yes, there is no connection between leaps and growth spurts. We have documented it, and sometimes it may be a coincidence, sometimes, but usually it has to do with the brain change, the growth in the brain. And if you talk about growth spurts, you probably mean just physical growth, like the length of your baby. We all know that, at least in my youth, we were posted against the door, and a line was above your head. A line was drawn on the doorpost, and then for instance, every week or every month, and there were many lines close together because you didn't grow much, and then all of a sudden the intervals between the lines were larger because you went into a growth spurt and your body length increased suddenly. But that kind of physical growth spurts are not correlated with the mental leaps. And definitely in the first year, the growth of the brain change also partly is an increase in volume of the brain. So if you measure the head circumference, there you will see just before or at the beginning of these difficult periods, suddenly an increase in the head circumference because the volume of the brain suddenly drastically increases. That doesn't go gradual. It goes for some time nothing, and then all of a sudden there it goes, and sometime later there it goes, and that goes together with the leaps, with the difficult periods. Wow. Because then all of a sudden a whole large part of volume is added to the brain, and this new piece of brain is giving this new perceptual ability.
My goodness, so the size of the brain actually increases in line with the leaps.
Oh yes, we have documented that, and it is in the literature. It's very, very clear. There are many other brain changes, and we mention them in the book. But the head circumference is the only one that we can see from the outside. All the other brain measures are invisible to a normal person. You have to measure them in a way that you can't do in daily life. But the head circumference is very easy for everybody to measure, and then all of a sudden, at just before a leap, you see that it is suddenly drastically larger.
That's just amazing. So one of the quotes in the book that I quite like, and it's something that I thought about a lot as my daughter was progressing through the leaps, was the quote that every baby is reborn 10 times in the first 20 months. And when you think about it like that as a mother, and I know as mums, these difficult periods can be really stressful and they take a lot out of us. And the book actually documents a number of mums who are going through this journey of the leaps with their child and the difficulties they're experiencing. But when you think about it like that being reborn, it really gives you a new sense of understanding and empathy for your child and why they're experiencing that crying and the clinging and the crankiness. And when you look at it like that, what the Wonder Weeks book does is it actually empowers parents to know when these things are going to happen and gives them that deeper level of understanding.
Well, thank you.
So I remember when I first picked up the book and downloaded the app, one of the first things I did was I had to put in my daughter's due date. And the thing that struck out to me most was, wow, some of these leaps, particularly in the early days, are only as short as 2 weeks, and some go for as long as 6 weeks. So at the moment, my youngest daughter, who's now 16 weeks, she's right in the middle of leap 4, and I've always referred to leap 4 as the dreaded leap 4 because, I don't know, I've always felt like it is one of the longest leaps. So if it's not the longest, it's one of the longest leaps. Why do their leaps vary in duration like this? Is it because some leaps are easier than others?
Well, especially the first 3 leaps in the first 3 months are last shorter, but then the leaps become longer, and there is not that much difference afterwards between the later leaps. For instance, leap 4 is on average 5 weeks with a range of 1 to 6. Leap 5 is 4 weeks with a range of 1 to 5 weeks. Leap 6 is 4 weeks with a range of 3 to 6 weeks, and so on. And it's not only the duration of the leaps that becomes longer, but also the interval between the leaps from approximately 3 to 4 weeks in the beginning to 8 to 11 weeks later on. That means that the speed of development is decreasing. Development slows down after 3 months, and that's genetically determined. And there are graphs of it. And so that's the reason why after 3 months, all of a sudden, and the duration and the intervals between the leaps become larger.
So those date ranges that you just quoted there, so I think you just said leap 4 is on average 5 weeks. So with the difficult periods itself, there is some variability then for how long the difficult period might last for.
These leaps are quite exactly timed, but of course there is still some variation, but the variation is small. The variation in mastering skills, as I explained earlier, is large, is a month. And the variation, duration, and the timing of the leaps and the difficult periods is small. But of course, in all of nature, there's some variation.
In the book, you also talk a little bit about temperament and the impact that a child's temperament might make on how they experience those leaps. So some children might experience the leaps with quite a bit of difficulty, and there are others who might not struggle quite as much. So temperament does play a big part in the prominence of those difficult periods.
That's correct, yes. The leaps can be absolutely very, very difficult for parents, or they can be easier for parents. But still, you say that your baby is more difficult than usual. So you know your own baby, you know she is normally her usual self in a certain way, and then you know there is a difference. And with temperamental babies, the difference is large, and with easygoing babies, it is easier, but it's still there.
So in both the book and also the app, there's a chart that actually documents the 10 leaps throughout those first 20 months. And on each of those charts, with each leap, there's an associated stormy cloud and there's also a sunny cloud. What is the significance of these two symbols, the sunny cloud and the stormy cloud that's attached to each one of these leaps?
So below the figure are the legenda. And if you read that, the stormy cloud means that around this week of the stormy cloud week, a difficult period is most likely to occur. And the sunny cloud means that around that week, it is most likely that your baby's sunny side will shine through again. So it's likelihood. The difficult period is not limited to the week of the stormy cloud, but apart from the first 3 leaps, may last weeks, as we have just said. And the dark horizontal bars in the chart are the weeks where the majority of our mothers reported their baby to be more difficult than usual. The majority. So they are, this chart is made of another scientific figure where there is the going up and down percentages of mothers reporting difficult periods. And we have taken, when the majority of mothers, more than 50%, report their babies to be more difficult, those are those bars. And but some babies start relatively early and stop relatively early, and some start relatively late and stop relatively late. And you can't see that in this chart, but they do last a number of weeks, but not exactly at that bar, because that's majority of mothers reporting their baby to be difficult.
I really do encourage mums that are interested to actually seek out the book. One of the traps we fall in as stressed and overtired mums is that we look at the app and we conclude that there's a difficult period on the horizon, or that our child is currently experiencing a leap. But the real empowerment of the Wonder Weeks, I feel, comes from not just the understanding of when a leap is going to happen, but knowing how we can help our child during that time. And the book goes through specific things we can do, so specific activities and games we can play with our child to help them with that particular leap. And I think that's the real value of the Wonder Weeks.
That's correct. The book has much more information than the app. The app just gives a very small summary, and it's a way to get acquainted with the existence of the difficult periods. Of course, you have the leap alarm built into it, and that is nice and easy, and it gives short summaries. But all the details you can find in the book.
So Dr. Frans, the question I've been asked repeatedly by so many mums is what happens after leap 10? I know, having worked through this with my child the first time, that even now she's 2.5, so well and truly over that 20-month point, I notice a lot of times where something might happen and I just think to myself, this seems to me like there's some sort of development going on, and she might go through a phase of say 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and it just brings me back to those days of the Wonder Weeks where I can just identify that there is some mental development going on and that things seem like they're changing. And in fact, what often happens is after that period of time, I do notice some significant changes. Mums want to know what happens once a child has finished leap 10. Are there any plans for expanding the Wonder Weeks book beyond that final leap?
Well, of course, we stopped our studies at the end of the sensory motor period at 20 months. And that's what the book is based on. And the master in the way he can restrict himself. So you at some point you have to restrict yourself to something. And we restricted ourselves to the sensory motor period. But from the literature, we know that leaps in the mental development of children continue, albeit with ever larger intervals. And as an example, think of the onset of puberty that not only goes together with hormonal changes, but also with major brain changes that has been established, in the last 2 decades. So it goes up with larger intervals in between. But usually people, scientists, try to record brain changes or changes in developmental changes, and they have focused not so much on difficult periods, although puberty, of course, it goes with lots of difficulties. We all know that. So at the moment, we are conducting research from 20 months to 6 years to see if difficult periods continue to occur, and if yes, when and how. And this is still ongoing, and we still have to process the data. But yes, of course, if the picture we have now appears to continue at later ages, we will report on that for sure.
I know that there'd be a lot of mums out there, myself included, that would love access to that information. Thank you so much, Dr. Frans, for taking the time to chat with me today on the MumLife Australia podcast. I am incredibly appreciative of the contribution you're making to our community and also the contribution you're making to help empower, inspire and support mums. Thank you very much, Dr. Frans. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the MumLife Australia podcast. You can find the details of the Wonder Weeks book and the app, plus the studies that Dr. Frans mentioned in our discussion, on the show notes at www.mumlifeaustralia.com. And don't forget to join the MumLife Australia community on Facebook, where you can have your questions answered by our tribe of experts and our podcast guests.